Welcome to Muckrakers, where we dig through the latest happenings around so-called AI. In each episode, we highlight recent events, contextualize the most important ones, and try to separate muck from meaning. I'm your host, Jacob Hames, and joining me is my co-host, Igor Krofchuk.
Thanks, Jacob. In this episode, we will talk about OpenAI's new model, O1, aka Strawberry, which is probably the biggest AI story in the last few weeks.
Before we get started, there were a few developments that didn't quite make the cut for what we want to talk about as the main thing this week, so we're just going to go through them real quick. OPIC by Comet is an open source LLM evaluation platform that was released.
OpenAI received a huge valuation that allegedly requires them to remove the cap on investor gains.
Australian government trial found that Llama 270B is worse than humans in every way at summarizing information. And an independent study found that Llama 270B is about as good as GPT-4.
Meta acknowledges scraping of all public posts by adults for AI training. The biggest surprise is probably that they actually went out and acknowledged it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if you have LinkedIn and you don't live in the EU, you have been opted into LinkedIn doing the exact same thing on its platform. We included the link in the show notes to the opt-out page.
Speaking of platforms dropping the mask, their CEOs are also dropping the mask and have apparently decided that the 0.1% is done being nice to the plebs. Mark Zuckerberg has said that he has, quote, done apologizing, signaling that he's switching policies from empty apology to straight up gaslighting about the harm that his company does. And Sam Altman, while I think not officially a billionaire yet, is apparently just like jumping ahead and snidely answering people who ask about features that he promised weeks and months ago, with just to be grateful for the gifts that he has given and that they will be getting new toys soon.
The White House announced a new private sector voluntary commitment to combat image-based sexual abuse. This seems good, but we all know how voluntary commitments generally go.
And finally, like right after O1 came out, a slew of papers came out that mathematically proves that like if you run models for long enough and if your chain of thought is long enough, it can solve any problem, which basically means that you can solve any problem that is polynomial complexity with a computer in polynomial time complexity. And you can also solve any problem that has exponential time complexity with a computer that you have configured to run for exponential time on the problem. So yeah, not as much of a result as people make it out to be. And there was a decent amount of snark in the academic Twitter for people in the know.
And then there were also a couple things that happened since our internal cutoff date that we have just to make sure that we actually know what we're talking about by the time we record. But they might appear in the next episode. So first, we've got Tech Republic reporting that companies using AI to write code are experiencing increasing downtimes as a result of, bad code.
The Institute for AI Policy and Strategy, or IAPS, released a literature review and incentives analysis on mapping technical safety research at AI companies.
And lastly, we got a paper titled Training Language Models to Self-Correct via Reinforcement Learning, which was released 7 days after OpenAI's O1, but it seems like it's basically doing the same thing. So Strawberry isn't the moat they were hoping for, at least not anymore.
I mean, we don't know if it's doing the same thing, but it sounds suspiciously what we described in the tech release, just with actual details and, like there's a paper and not just a marketing release.
Right. And that actually leads pretty well into Strawberry, aka O1. So, Igor, implicitly or explicitly, why should we care about this?
Well, like if you believe the press release, then it's a complete paradigm shift in the way we use enormous amounts of electricity to answer questions like what is 2 plus 2? And almost always get the answer right now. Basically, this is the much hyped GPT-5 model, except they're not calling it GPT-5 because they say it resets the counter on AI capabilities, and therefore it requires a whole new numbering system. And they're making it out to be the biggest paradigm shift in AI we've seen since the arrival of LLMs. So if you believe OpenAI, you should definitely care about this.
Sure. All right. So what was it? There's a new model. It was released by OpenAI on September 12th. They announced it with a light blog post. They did include a system card, which is 43 pages, but you know, probably most people aren't reading that. OpenAI has been hyping it for like a pretty long time, or at least hyping it a lot. Maybe not for super long, but putting a lot of effort into it. And it came out sooner than we had thought it was going to, or well, that the rumor mill said it was going to.
So my rumor mill was basically putting it like 2 weeks after the time where it actually came out.
Okay.
And yeah, like the system card, if you're not into reading between the lines, it's basically just like a bunch of fluff.
Yeah.
Um, it makes a big deal out of pretty to be expected behavior that is, if anything, more benign than you would expect. So they make a big deal out of a model technically doing a cyber activity like hacking itself out of a containment unit. When what happened is they fucked up and they didn't set up the containment unit. And then the model thought that just the network was down and scanned around a bit and found the Docker host that ran both its current container and the eval container and figured out that, oh, I can just control this Docker host actually. And then it helpfully tried to fix things and properly recontain itself so it could do the benchmark properly. And only once this failed did it just do like the give me the solution directly command that really like broke the containment. So if we go by this evidence, then we're fine because like the AI will, upon escaping from the box, helpfully put itself back in if it manages to.
Yeah. All right. So I mean that goes well into like how it's being sold too, which we've touched on a little bit. But from your circles and what you're seeing, like what are they saying about this? Why are they saying it's like resetting the counter? What how is it different?
So the big thing with this famous scaling of the LLM, that if you're in the field in the community, the big thing has been, oh, if you just add more data, it gets better. You have to add exponentially more data for it to get better. But with enough VC funding and enough hype, you can go deep into an exponential cost curve for linear return. But at some point, that shit runs out.
Mm-hmm.
So we were already in this flattening of the curve, and what is already in the rumor thing is that like we might have just run out of data for this type of scaling to continue. So you need to scale in other ways. The
Mm-hmm.
one thing you can just make more of is compute. So people have been trying to turn compute into data, for example. There's lots of discussion about, oh, if we get the model good enough, we can just do synthetic data from the model. And OpenAI basically claims that they have figured out two things: how to scale compute at training time by doing RL on the model, which we'll get into in a second, and then also using compute at test time. So like spending more attempts or more effort in getting a good answer. And then both of these are now independent of data. So in theory, you can just like scale it up ad infinitum. So that's like their big reason why they're hyped about it, that the scaling can continue.
Right. And a lot of the term, like the key term that I see in most of their material is reasoning and complex reasoning. That's how they're talking about it. I saw even like an article that or a video that was talking with developers and they start thinking about, oh, it's saying things like I'm curious about and like I'm thinking and you can really relate to the model. And for me that just sends off huge red flags. Because it seems like intentional personification for, money. So yeah,
So I don't
that's
think
my take there.
I don't think they deliberately set out to impersonate people, but they cite a previous paper of theirs, which was process supervision in either the blog post or the model card. And that was basically just training the model to do the process, not just like training to imitate, but actually giving it feedback on how it does as it does a task for the fine tuning.
Hmm.
Which, for people who don't know, normally when you do fine tuning, you just collect a bunch of labels, and you have a model that tells the LLM how close it is to the good ones, or how close it is to the bad ones, and then lets it do less of that.
Hmm.
And this process vision thing was, okay, let's also tell it how it did on every step. And that's how it gets to be more consistent across longer chains of argumentation. I don't want to say reasoning, because it's like what you can see is that there's like text being output, and there is afterwards a argumentation that is written out. And with LLMs, everyone who works with them knows at some point the stochastic like randomness kicks in, and it just goes wild with like plausible language but complete nonsense.
Right.
And
So
yeah,
I think that's like a good uh, segue into how do they explain it in a technical sense. So this is just what they're saying it does, and how they're expressing it without as much of the marketing fluff, but still just what they're saying.
sticking with what they're saying, they're using this technique called chain of thought, which is making the model spell out its thoughts and maybe prompting it to do that in a specific way. But they claim to have integrated that into a single model, so you don't need to do like a prompt engineering for it. And they claim to have trained it to correct itself when it goes off. Normally, when the LLM goes off in the bad path, it's really hard to unlodge it. Even if you correct it, you need to kind of really break the pattern or reset it in some sense. And here the model appears to be trained on catching itself, looking backwards on, oh, this was wrong, therefore I should try something else. And they claim that this was done with reinforcement learning, which we don't know if this is just reinforcement learning from human feedback, so the standard fine-tuning method, which would mean that they just label the hell out of process, and there's like rumor mill stuff that ProQuest workers have been receiving, like lots of gigs of like, solve this math problem, but really record yourself thinking out loud every step of your thought process.
Hmm.
Or it could be reinforcement learning, in which case they did something that I don't want to say, but we talked about it like before. That could be a clever way to scale the training, but we don't know. And I'm not
Yeah.
gonna tell them like ideas, even though they're probably smarter than me.
Yeah. Um, and then just like getting into some concrete things that they're also saying, which I think are telling when you get into it, are first of all on the O1 scorecard, they have key areas of evaluation, and those key areas are just disallowed content, training data regurgitation, hallucinations, and bias. And each one of those has a check mark next to it. And then at the bottom of this scorecard, it says that all the items with a check mark are improved or comparable performance from previous flagship OpenAI model. So really, they're saying it's the same, I guess.
If you look at the benchmark numbers in specific areas where what they presumably did for training is like exactly what would catch certain things, they do show a big increase. So like if we are being hostile and we assume that they just paid a bunch of math nerds to solve math puzzles out loud,
Hmm.
then that seems to have paid off because it's much better at math now according to the benchmark. And also according to Terence Tao's like informal anecdotal things that like it is only a what is it called, like mediocre grad students incapable of creative leaping, but like able to at some point arrive at the right result if given enough hints,
Hmm.
basically. So that is like like for LLMs that's pretty good, and we see this payoff, but it doesn't seem to transfer. And like they do also note that like in areas where the thing that they're trying to do is not the desirable thing, like creative writing, it seems to have regressed in a human evaluation, which is not good if you are in the thing of like, oh, there's a single intelligence thing, and if we scale it up, it's going to get better at everything. But like we're already seeing like specialization across these foundation models that were meant to be these generalist models.
Yeah. And then one other thing that I thought was interesting from an OpenAI employee, uh, they tweeted results on the reported benchmarks are really strong, but that doesn't necessarily translate to something that a user can feel. And they're also saying, even in like the blog post, we plan to release improved versions of this model as we continue iterating, which to me says, look, we know it's not actually good, but I mean, maybe I'm just projecting there.
I don't know. I mainly agree with you, but like um, benchmarks being meaningful is a difficult thing. One thing it was telling to me was that they didn't actually check on the one benchmark that people actually think is a bit meaningful, which is like SWE bench. It's like software engineering bench. They did like the simpler code force one.
Hmm.
And all of the benchmarks is stuff that is like if you fine tune this on math puzzles and like logic puzzles, then it's like kind of within the training distribution. So like they have generate a nonogram or nomogram, which is like a math puzzle. So yeah,
Right.
like I would expect it to be better at that. Um, Honestly, we don't know. I don't get the vibe that it does better at anything for the cost. And the one benchmark that you could argue matters, because you can't overfit on it, which is Francois Chollet's ARC Eval ARC price evaluation. It
Hmm.
does 0.2% better than Claude, so
Right.
at 21.2%, where specially made kind of like general learning models that are not as useful for everyday tasks because we don't have as much knowledge, they get like 51%. And Francois Chollet um, commented that this is like a difference between open-ended reasoning ability and memorizing a set of reasoning patterns. And that's kind of like what I would say would be the thing. Like it won't feel very different for people who aren't required to perform the same reasoning pattern a lot of times. So like I could see this being useful at some point to do like Fermi estimates for consulting bullshit. You're asked to estimate a bunch of numbers in like a thing where there's a lot of like indirect knowledge that you can draw from, and you just need to make a plausible estimate as a first guess so that the client can like start to think about something. That's like a task where you have the same pattern always,
Hmm.
and you need knowledge. So like but we don't know, and nobody has like made a benchmark for that, and nobody has come out and said, "Oh yeah, overwhelmingly this is much better now." Like it's all a bit mixed. What we know is that for this 0.2% boost against Claude, it takes 4.2 minutes versus 0.3 minutes. So
Okay.
that means like 18 seconds. So
Hmm.
so that is like feasible. Like you need to ingest the whole thing, and then Claude outputs like an answer in like a few seconds.
Hmm.
Whereas O1 just does the whole thing where it's like a very pained search through associations, and it might or might not come to the right one.
Okay. And the reason for that, at least as far as I'm understanding, like using their docs to understand it, um, is they're just running it more. Like they're taking the input you give it, and then they're running it once, and then they take the answer, and then there's some internal prompt, but they just run it again with that internal prompt and the output from the first uh like pass, and then they do it again.
So in their AMA, which we should think about as a marketing event, of course, they
Right.
claim it as a single model. And like Noam Brown, I think, who's like a legit researcher in the field, also says it's not a system, it's a single model. So they seem to be running a model for longer. And my best guess, based on their docs and what these people have said, is that they're doing some fancy decoding that I will not go into detail on again to not give any ideas. But like if you're in the field, you know what fancy decoding this might be. And then that will take a while to produce every token. And then it seems to actually have been trained to look back on what it did and draw inference and spell those out. And if you look at the process, like Sometimes it manages to do that, it catches mistakes. Sometimes it doesn't, and it just like keeps repeating the same mistake until it kind of like does a different token, which seems to have some semantic meaning. That's why I meant like I don't think they trained it to be misleading. They probably have some special tokens that indicate kind of like look at other options, look at what you did and see if you can summarize what you did.
Mm.
And it doesn't do it like explicitly, but it's like it's a token, and then in the forward pass of a transformer, that token will get that. And it might literally just be like the human verbalizations that they kind of standardized on in the training, that they told people, hey, just say ha, interesting, when you did something. Just
Mm-hmm.
keep making noises, because we can use that for the training, and then it kind of like stochastically arrive at interesting, but wait, like it has these like very formulaic points, but it's like but wait is like okay, I made a new connection between things, let me explore that. Or like but is like some elaboration thing. Interesting is just like an observation to kind of like think more, like not think, but like people already did work on this where we just padded inputs, where we just like did like extra inputs, because every token that you add for the model is like more scratch space for the stochastic stuff to latch onto.
Mm-hmm.
So
So
yeah.
the the part that then confuses me, like, is they say explicitly again in their documentation that you are getting charged for tokens that are being generated that you don't get to see.
That one is one of the spicy ones. So one of the big things around OpenAI and the AI safety community that have led to OpenAI, like not like the Timnit Gebru AI ethics derived one, or like the engineering safety derived one, but like the TESCRA, like EA adjacent ones. They've also
Okay.
know like alignment being important, and you can't just run unaligned models, and the model, if you don't alignment even during training, that might be very dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So OpenAI is now making the argument that actually, if we run a completely unaligned model in this new paradigm and we actually see its thoughts, we can actually be much safer, because we can actually like legibly see the reasoning process that the AI used, and do supervision on intermediate steps. And in order to do this, they need to not align the base model, and for that they need to hide it from the user. So that's why you have like reasoning tokens that are just output tokens that you pay for, but they don't show it to you, because it might be saying like horrible shit that isn't caught by their censorship thing. Like there's a Twitter user that I am not necessarily a fan of the vibe, but like he does good jailbreaking stuff, and who he has gotten like the model to output like what appears to be underage people erotica, and then even the summaries that like the sensor thing does are still kind of like adjacent to that, and then like it still outputs you the message. So like I'm not sure how well this is working, but he was banned by OpenAI, so I guess now we're all safe, and this will never happen again. I'm saying is like I'm not convinced of that approach, but they're selling it as like this is the way into like a new paradigm of safety as well, and it's just necessary that now they get to charge you for like trust me, bro. This is totally something that the model did.
Right. Yeah, that's the part that really gets me off this entire thing is like, why am I paying for your lack of safety? Effectively, if I want to use this model, I'm now paying you more money and have less understanding of what's happening because you couldn't actually make your system uh meet standards.
The reason why they did that is that, or conjecture from me,
Okay, okay,
is
okay.
that if you do the type of supervision that makes the model more probable to say like corporate safe PC bullshit versus whatever,
Hmm.
is that you're like risking losing some of the stuff that you pre-trained on. Whereas if
Right.
you just have like the pre-trained model and then you just like tune it to use whatever it has trained for knowledge, then you're not technically creating any pressure for like removing knowledge.
Hmm.
So it has a higher chance to like in the um, kind of like search tree that it generates to come up with something that might be relevant, like some bit, some solution, and then you want to do that, but you also don't want your model to get cancelled for saying like racist or maybe depending on how the next election goes, trans friendly things. Like you want the thing to be like PC, and then you need to afterwards try to censor it.
Hmm.
The big question for me is one, like how well will this work? Because like it's always about the exact coefficient on the complexity curve that you're dealing with in these systems. But in theory, this thing could actually work. In theory, you could also just get a billion completely random outputs and try to filter them down to something good with like a much smaller model,
Hmm.
or do some other like purely like dumb stochastic way, just like tuning things. There was actually a paper that looked at chain of thought and a bunch of other like more fancy prompt techniques and said just run the model as many times in parallel as you're using in terms of this chain of thought stuff, and then take the best ones.
Right. That's
That
got.
paper, sorry,
Sorry. Go ahead.
that paper though saturated at some point. And now the question is like, did their training get the saturation point to be higher to be useful, or just remove it? If yes, then this might actually be a new paradigm thing. If not, and as of what we've seen right now, it doesn't seem to have, because it's not that good and Claude is still better.
Hmm.
Um, then why did they release this at all? That's the bigger
Yeah.
question almost.
I mean, so we had talked about this briefly, but like there was a model that came out that was open source relatively like a week and a half or so before this was released, and it's claiming to do something similar.
It was claiming. That's a bunch of drama that we can briefly summarize for also.
Oh, okay. It was so it's no it was bullshit. They weren't actually doing it.
Did you look into it, or am I gonna give you
No,
like
you
an
give me the details.
Okay, so for some of the things we talked about, we did some prep, but here I have a joy of giving like a bit of juicy and just entertaining drama to Jacob and you, dear listeners, uh, and we get like Jacob's unfiltered
Yeah,
reaction. So I'm
yeah.
looking forward to this.
Okay, unfiltered reaction.
So imagine you're one of the dozens, maybe almost hundreds. We're gonna do fancy new things with AI startups that has raised money,
Sure.
and you have like a few hundred mil in the bank, so you can run a bunch of models. But you're not OpenAI, so you're not gonna train a foundation model.
Right.
So one of the things that people have been trying to get to work is basically this reflection idea, this actual like find the magical prompting technique that unlocks the ability of LLMs to look back and self correct. Because
Okay.
then, in theory, you can do a lot of fancy things. Like you can have just a baseline Llama v3. You say, okay, every 50,000 tokens, I have it summarize what it did in a compact way. Let's say 10,000 tokens max. And I really put effort into making this good. Like I use this reflection prompt a lot. So like what it does in this checkpoint is really correct. And I just reset at this point. It just uses the summary and continues. So you basically have infinite error-free context.
Hmm. Okay.
That's pretty useful, but it relies on you to be able to really do this correction thing. And it
Hmm.
always fails because what the model actually does is it like collects some statistics and then it kind of like vides in a certain direction. It's not only the tokenizer. Like people have been using this strawberry thing as a benchmark, but it's not only the tokenizer. Sometimes it correctly spells things out in the way that like the tokenizer doesn't glob together the last two R's. So like normally the tokenizer it globs together the array ending into a single token because it's relatively common, and then it doesn't see that there are two R's. It only sees like one R and the array, and like it infers that there's one R in there, but it can't actually tell you that it's like three R's in the strawberry word. And then one thing that people have tried is like make it spell out the word before, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So it's not only the tokenites; it's also the fact that they just can't count. And
Okay.
uh, fixing that would be like cool. And
Sure.
but nobody managed to. Papers have failed. People always say that it works, and then people do a benchmark, it doesn't actually work. And then
Right.
reflection comes out, and they get like Claude level performance on all of the meaningful benchmarks. Like not only the ones that OpenAI use, but also like SVE bench everything. They do like as good or better than Claude.
Okay.
So and they claim to do this with like a fine-tuned Llama v3, just like a LoRa 70B. So like in theory, if you infuse it, you can run this at home. Like it will be like
Right.
a beefy gaming machine, but like you can have a
You can.
like box under your cupboard.
Right.
But they don't have a model online yet, so they say, "Oh, we'll get to that." And also, here's an API for you to play in the meantime.
Sure.
Then people find out, this sounds suspiciously like Claude because these LLMs they have a certain tone to them, there's a certain pattern of how they answer questions. Like
Right.
Claude is like a bit less excited than OpenAI in general, for example.
Yeah.
And then they say, this appears to be literally Claude because if you give the same prompt to him 10 times, it does the same prompt 10 times, except when you ask it for its name, then it gives you the same prompt, but you'd Control F, Control H, Claude for reflection AI. So that was sus. But it's like no, like you have it wrong. Also, here are the weights. You can check for yourself now. So then people download the weights and they check the weights,
Mm-hmm.
and it appears that Llama v
3.1.
doesn't match because you can do like a decomposition. You can say, okay, here's my like LoRa component of a model, and here's the base a base model, and then like the delta is like this low rank
Right.
adaptation that you do. But you
Okay.
know what matches? Llama v
3.0.
like if you do this LoRa decomposition against what they uploaded, and you then take a checkpoint of Llama v
3.0.
perfect match of a base model. Llama v
3.1.
no. So,
Okay.
so like, oh, sorry, we must have uploaded the wrong checkpoint by mistake.
Oh,
This
whoops.
is
Okay.
more complicated than we thought. Which like like people were weirdly forgiving about it in some comments. They said, "Oh yeah, like Git LFS is a horrible hack," and they said, "Oh no, yeah, like we uploaded something by mistake.
Okay.
It was a whoopsie." All of this tooling is really complicated. And also, can somebody help us set up a BitTorrent? Which like it's not very complicated to set up a BitTorrent, and like if you have a actual working like reflection model, you can ask that model.
Right.
Like
Because, yeah, wouldn't Claude be able to do that?
yes, it is. Like it's not a
Okay.
complicated thing. Depending on what tooling you use, you can run a single command and you have it seeding. Like it's not as complicated as fine tuning a model. And like like if you have a checkpoints, then like Hugging Face makes it really easy to upload checkpoints. It's also not a very high tech tooling. But like so again, you know what's coming, but like sus. And then like this was happening in parallel, and
Okay.
then after people pointed out, oh, this is just Claude with Control F, suddenly it stopped looking like Claude. What would you think they did? Because it was still giving frontier model performance, but it wasn't Claude anymore.
They switched to OpenAI's.
Yes, they switched to GPT-4o. And
Wow.
I don't know what the official story is now, but if I was an investor in this company, I would be pissed.
Yeah.
Because like even if they have it figured out now, like you will not undo this like brand damage.
No. Wow.
So like just everyday things in the like I need hype for my next funding round because oh my god these credits add up fast, and like we're like six very smart dudes in a basement, but like we're still just six dudes and we might all be like geniuses in NLP, but none of us has ever administrated Kubernetes before. And that's why we pay big bucks for cloud computing. So like we run out of money. That's my personal story. Like this is to allegedly, and like I think if they had gotten anything like this to work, they wouldn't have used the Cloud API. So it's kind of like the thing. Like if you do
Right.
something that is this sus, you can't do the real thing. So I hope they learn from this and like kind of like like touch grass, get out of the industry a bit, and then like do non-scammy things.
Okay.
But if you're an OpenAI and you're hyping up a reasoning thing that basically does this reflection thing, and you're shopping your models around to the feds amongst other places. This is one of the things that we have as a possible theory on why are they releasing it. It's like the rumor mill claims that like the feds might have had early access. There were like rumors of like there is a government cloud that is completely off premise and it's just normal like gov cloud like this like before any conspiracy theorists get onto our audience like the NSA has a personal copy of AWS because they just like pay contractors to do it and they have like specific like requirements and there's nothing like evil about it. It's just like
Yeah, it's just a
if you're
security thing.
a capitalist thing, so you're not against private enterprises, you think it's a good thing to do it, and like you have like access to Amazon with lots of smart people running a cloud system for you, then like getting a personal copy of AWS running in the NSA headquarters on premise and just like licensing the software and the IP from Amazon and being compatible, it means you can now hire more people. You can hire like a standard Kubernetes admin to run on your personal cloud thing. So that's nothing evil. And
Right.
like I said, like security thing that like if they are doing this, they probably have like the model on premise. They have full access to all of the code, so there's no like sneaky little phone home thing,
Right.
and that makes total sense basically.
Yeah.
But what my mental model of these type of agencies though is that they might not be like up to the bleeding research all the time, and I don't think they're ever ahead of what is available in academia more than like a few weeks, unless it's extremely specialized, like like skunk work, like the original skunk work style thing, like aerodynamics control surfaces on stealth jets. Yeah, definitely. Like the public stuff is probably way behind, or like nuclear reactors, like but there also like that to work on this you need to get clearance.
Yeah.
Stuff like computer science, maybe there's some 0 days, but this is so unmotable if you want to actually make any form of progress that at most like proprietary labs have like a few months or years worth of like head head start,
Hmm.
and this includes OpenAI. So like we shouldn't expect them to be radically different than OpenAI, but a few months extra time on Strawberry as soon as it was ready, that makes sense. And then like if you're shopping around for like more funding, uh, and a startup kind of poisons the well and kind of like makes it possible that like the first association that any like due diligence thing that will come up in if anybody does like a check is a bullshit thing like this that claims it doesn't work, then you might want to like unpoison the well and release stuff a bit earlier. And the
Yeah.
timelines would kind of match for like a somewhat like rushed release. It would also like a week. It might have been a week. It might have been a few days where this drama happened, and then Strawberry drops like earlier than expected. It might also match with they just running out of money and they like need to release it in order to create the hype because that's what they have and they don't have time to make it much better. So they're now like hoping that the next round of funding is gonna give them more time to really make it impressive. On the other hand, like this shit takes time to produce in the way that did, so they probably planned this release like for this rough time frame months ago. Like they filmed videos, they had like collaborations ready, they had like independent frontier lab evaluation like think tanks ready.
Right.
So like we don't know. And my biggest thinking about it is the fundraising thing, and we're like we need to make this shit hypey again, and maybe a boiling of a frog situation where like they're releasing this type of model and getting people used to like the pricing being, oh, it's just a preview. and then at some point they phase out the old GPT thing because like the thing is better than everything else, even if it's more expensive, or like it's parity expensive now. And like, sure, now we have gotten you used to the idea of you don't even see what you pay for, but like people accept it because now it's just a preview. They can also kind of like under promise by calling it a preview.
Yeah,
Like it might be meh, but just a preview, guys. It's gonna get better.
right.
So like there's
So
a
I
bunch of
mean
stuff.
that gets to like the like what does it mean, right? Um so for me, yeah, the I would say the most meaningful thing is that if people like swallow the pill of being okay with not seeing tokens that they're being charged for, which it seems like they are, at least to some extent, we're gonna have some major problems with transparency moving forward. Like it's just gonna be that much harder to get them to be upfront about what they're actually doing with the compute that you are paying for.
I honestly don't think it was much of a difference because like already you didn't know the system prompt, you didn't know
That's true.
like they could just lie to you about the token count as well. Like you can check with your own tokenization, but all they needed to do to undo it is like, oh yeah, we have a fancy tokenizer now. Like you don't have it because it's proprietary, but you know, like trust us, it's like similar. So like,
Yeah, but it removes any semblance of oversight there. Like at least before you could theoretically do it and like you could compare, and if it wasn't along the same lines, like that's a problem, but now it can be systematically different and you can't do anything about it.
I mean, they claim to tell you how much it reasoned, and so it's more of it's like a stochastic thing, and like people will figure out a way to kind of like say, okay, like if you do this prompt, then like it bounds the thinking a bit. So like I agree with you, it's bad, but it's like if we're talking about this stuff, we've already lost the fight. Like the main problem is that there's a centralized server that nobody has access to. There's no standards around this. They keep selling a product and basically saying, yeah, but you know, it's just a research thing. So you know, like you do your own thing. Like this is just like something we make available, and we try our best to make it secure. But you know, if
Yeah.
North Korea uses it and we catch them like 3 months later, then that's a big win for us because like we caught them and like Zuckerberg in the lead-in, you know, like uh, they just disclaim any responsibility for any harm that comes from making something like this available at this scale, at this convenience level. And they prefer to focus on the existential risk and it killing you. So I think that's like the bigger meaning that they're really trying to keep you on that thing instead
Mm-hmm.
of the curve saturating. Like that's I think the biggest thing. Like the biggest meaning thing is like even for me as like a known critic, there's plausible continuation of the improvement now. It could work. I don't
Okay.
think it will,
Sure. Yeah, me
but like
neither.
I'm really being careful because I might eat these words. Like if this meaningfully goes towards like the benchmark that I tweeted about a while ago of like real reasoning, in the sense that like not paint a stream of thought and then summarizing the nuggets that you stumbled upon, but like some form of like directed thing with a deliberation, with like a meta awareness, all of these things it might lead to that, plausibly,
Okay.
if you get a lot of even more exponential training data and compute. But we don't know. And I think that's the biggest impact that's going to come from this that, like, they get hype, they continue the plausible element, and they now subtly rewrote two things. Like I said, they're not going to, like, be accountable even on the token level. And as somebody who isn't in this test Grail cluster, but like who knows a lot of very nice people who genuinely think about it, like I'm surprised by how blasé everyone in this field is about them running and training an unaligned model. Because if you read like the old AI safety literature, you know, like having training time, like cognizance about learning to lie in the downstream at deployment, like that's a risk factor that they used to be really into that they love to like talk about like mesa optimization. DeepMind has like a whole paper around this, and apparently we're reaching a point where that just doesn't matter anymore. And now
Well,
we
yeah,
are
we've thrown enough money at it that they stopped caring.
like, we're just gonna train at scale an unaligned model and deploy it at scale and rely on like a different model to catch it if it does something bad. Which, if you believe AI is gonna go FUM narrative, that sets a really bad safety precedent because it's kind of like saying like, okay, we used to, I don't know, like do alchemy, but like with like hazmat suits and stuff like that. So like we mixed mercury and all of that stuff like kind of like at random, but we wore like protective suits. And like if it might have exploded based on prior experiences, like when we like did like glass around it and stuff like this. And we didn't have any system. We didn't really like have a theory except like if we keep mixing stuff at some point, something is gonna work. And it gave
Right.
us some progress. Like the alchemists figured out some stuff, right? Like there was like knowledge in there. They weren't like chemists, but they were like proto-chemists.
Right.
But now we've kind of moved to actually, like mercury is much easier to handle if you just scoop it up with your bare hand, and you just need to kind of like wash your hand afterwards in this like mercury draining thing, and like it's fine. And like mercury is like much more complete, but like just scoop up this unknown material because it's faster, and like we can get better results because maybe your hand stuff interacts with the thing in some way. And just wash your hands thoroughly and make sure that you don't like go to the kitchen and start cooking afterwards, and should be fine. This is kind of like probably not a perfect image, but like if you buy the AI story, then like what happened as well, which I'm surprised more people aren't complaining about this, especially with our next topic. Um,
Yeah, and but last thing I wanted to do is say like if we scrape away the muck, which I think we can both agree is most of what's going on here, is just sort of throwing dirt and other garbage over to see if people will buy it, and making things more confusing. But is there something meaningful here? Are there any new, either technologically or societally, like things or ideas that have been brought up through this O1 stuff?
I mean, there was a paper that came out directly afterwards that seems to do what they did, so probably yes. But whether or not it's gonna make the change that they promise is basically TBD, and as of now, unlikely, based on the arc eval test and just the general mehness of the release.
Mm-hmm.
That's my most kind take on is there something there in what they said.
Okay. Yeah, I think that there's something in the personification as well. It just giving us a signal of like this is the direction they're trying to go in terms of marketing. Um, because to me it seemed like it was leaning pretty heavily into the idea of like, oh, it's almost human in how it's acting in a lot of their media, and so I think acknowledging that as we move forward is also important.
I also saw, just to confirm with that, like a researcher commenting that throughout the communications of a lot of the people doing the AMA, and also like the way they talk about it in the model card, this person worried. It was like a Twitter post, so like this is basically rumor mill. If people want to like base it in credibility wise, that the people working on this might have drunken the Kool-Aid on the personification. But like if you think about it in terms of chain of thoughts, you think about it as speaking with an AI and not as prompting an LLM, that changes the way what failure modes you expect. And we saw it already with the strawberry thing, and like people forgetting that there's a tokenizer in the mix, people forgetting that the whole thing aggregates in some way like signals it gets from a sequence. So like sometimes you can just like overload the system prompt to jailbreak stuff. All of these things are very predictable if you think about it as an LLM doing stochastic association. But it's very surprising if you think about it as an AI that is like like learning a world model.
Right.
So I've like it's basically saying yes to your point, but it has already started, and it's morphing, but like, it seems to be getting deeper.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely agree. Cool. I think that should be everything then. I'm gonna stop the recording.